Was that old man out of his mind? Someone shouted as I climbed over a broken fence toward a shed already swallowed in flames. Smoke rolled across the yard so thick I could barely see the porch light behind me. A man grabbed the back of my jacket and yelled that there was a propane tank inside and the whole place could blow at any second. I tore free and kept moving. 2 hours earlier, the only thing I'd wanted was a ride home from the train station. I had just scattered my wife Carol's ashes from the pier she loved, then boarded the 4:10 train back to the city alone. Before arriving, I texted my son and daughter, getting in around 6. Any chance one of you can pick me up? My son answered first. Swamped tonight, Dad. Just take the train home. You know the way. A minute later, my daughter Rachel replied, You really should have told us earlier. We could have planned around it. I stared at both messages for a few seconds, then typed the same thing I'd been saying for most of my life. No problem. 6 hours later, half the neighborhood knew my name, because someone had filmed a gray-haired man in a rain-soaked flannel shirt dragging 2 children from a burning shed behind a house on Larkspur Lane. By morning, the local news had my full name on television. Strangers knew exactly who Walter Pruitt was. My own daughter still had no idea. Rachel didn't hear about it from me or from her brother. She found out at the hair salon when her stylist propped a phone against the mirror and played the footage while cutting her hair. I'm Walter Pruitt. I'm 64 years old, and I spent 31 years working as a machinist until my knees finally forced me into retirement. I've never been the kind of man who needed attention. If something broke, I fixed it. If someone needed help, I showed up. Carol handled everything else. She remembered every birthday, mailed Christmas cards every December, and could turn a stranger in a grocery line into an old friend before reaching the register. I preferred engines, ladders, clogged gutters, and anything that could be repaired with my hands. Carol used to say people trusted me with their problems because I never made anyone feel like a burden. Maybe she was right. I just never wanted the people I loved carrying more weight than they already had. 4 days before that fire, I stood alone on a dock in Cape May and opened the container holding Carol's ashes. Years earlier, she had told me exactly where she wanted to go when the time came. Back then, neither of us imagined how soon I'd have to keep that promise. She fought for 18 months. Chemotherapy, another treatment, another trial, another sliver of hope until one quiet Sunday morning there was nothing left for us to fight. I sat beside her hospital bed, holding her hand while the machines counted down the final moments I wasn't ready to lose. Grief doesn't wait until you're prepared. It simply follows you home. Carol wanted a small service, so that was what she got. No giant flower arrangements. She always said they were a waste of good money that could help someone who actually needed it. Only a handful of people came, the ones who truly knew her, while her favorite Patsy Cline record played softly from a little speaker on a folding table. After everyone left, I stayed by the water until a funeral home employee approached and gently told me they had to lock the gate. You can come back tomorrow if you want, he said. I looked at the empty pier and told him, tomorrow already feels like another year. The next morning, I packed one bag and boarded the train home with my wedding ring still on my finger because I couldn't imagine taking it off. During flights, Carol used to grab my arm whenever the plane hit turbulence and promised that if we landed safely, she was ordering the biggest plate of crab cakes on the menu. Sitting alone by the train window, I kept looking at the empty seat beside me. For the first time in decades, there was nobody there to grab my arm. The empty seat beside me said more than words ever could. When the train pulled into the station a little after 6, everyone hurried off to someone waiting for them. I stayed seated a few seconds longer, staring through the window at an empty platform. No Gary, no Rachel, nobody. I opened our family text thread and typed, Just got in. Any chance someone can pick me up? Asking my own children for help had never come naturally, so I almost deleted it before hitting send. Gary answered first. Swamped tonight, Dad. Just take the train home. You know the way. Rachel followed a few minutes later. You should have told us earlier so we could plan around it. Plan around it. As if grief came with a schedule. As if scattering their mother's ashes could be squeezed between a conference call and whatever else mattered more that Tuesday night. I could have told them exactly where I'd been. I could have said I'd just carried their mother to the place she loved most, and that, for once, I didn't want to make the trip home alone. Instead, I typed, no problem, slipped the phone into my pocket, and walked out of the station. You can't force people to show up for you. Eventually, you just notice who does. A light rain had started. Buses hissed along the curb, music rattled from a passing car, and people rushed home as if it were any other Tuesday. I took my usual shortcut through the side streets, cutting 15 minutes off the walk to my building. My knees were aching, but exhaustion was worse. For weeks, 3 hours of sleep had felt like a good night. Near the corner of Larkspur Lane, I spotted a young mother struggling to pull a stroller up her porch steps while balancing 2 grocery bags. One wheel caught against the bottom stair. I walked over, freed it, and helped her lift the stroller onto the porch. "Thank you," she said. "I hope somebody returns the favor when you need it." I gave her a tired smile. "I hope so too." Then I smelled smoke. A dark plume was rising behind the houses 2 doors down. Within seconds, people were spilling onto the sidewalk. Behind a collapsed section of fence stood an old garden shed that had been converted into a playroom for 2 boys. A space heater had tipped over inside, and the dry wooden siding was already burning fast. Neighbors crowded the sidewalk with phones in their hands, but nobody went near it. Then a woman screamed, "The boys are still inside." Everything changed. Smoke pushed from beneath the shed door in a thick gray wall. Someone yelled that their mother had gone looking for a fire extinguisher. Another voice warned there was a propane tank nearby. A man caught my sleeve. "Don't be stupid. Wait for the fire department." I pulled away. Before my knees forced me into retirement, I'd spent years running emergency drills at the plant fires, chemical spills, evacuation procedures, all the training you hope never becomes useful. That night, my body remembered before my fear caught up. I ran across the yard and grabbed the shed door. The latch had swollen in the heat and wouldn't move. I slammed my shoulder against it. Nothing. Flames were already crawling higher along the siding. I spotted a cinder block beside a garden bed, grabbed it with both hands, and smashed it into the small window. The first hit cracked the glass. The second shattered it. A wave of black smoke exploded through the opening and wrapped around my face. I turned away, coughing, then heard something from inside. A child, coughing hard, scared, alive. I dropped the cinder block and moved toward the broken window. People like to call what happened next bravery. It wasn't. I didn't stop to think about the flames, the propane tank, or what might happen if I went inside. I heard a child coughing, and my body moved before fear could catch up. I reached through the shattered window, found the latch, and forced the door open from the inside. A piece of glass sliced across my forearm, but I barely noticed. Through the smoke, I saw 2 boys, maybe 7 and 9, pressed against the far wall where the air was still thin enough to breathe. "Come on! We're getting out!" I lifted the younger boy over my shoulder and pointed at my belt. "Grab on," I told his brother. "Whatever happens, don't let go." He wrapped both hands around it. I bent low and pushed toward the door. The heat felt like it was closing around us, but seconds later we stumbled into the yard together. Their mother came running around the side of the house, clutching a fire extinguisher, screaming their names. The older boy released my belt and ran straight into her arms. I dropped to one knee with the younger one, still coughing against my shoulder. Watching that woman hold her sons, only one thought crossed my mind. Carol never would have forgiven me if I'd stood there and watched another family lose someone when I had a chance to stop it. Firefighters arrived and had the flames under control within 20 minutes. A young officer carrying a clipboard came over and asked for my name. Walter Pruitt, 64. He looked at my soaked clothes, the blood running down my arm, and the smoke stains across my face. "You want to sit in the ambulance for a minute? I've had worse." He almost smiled. "Every man over 60 says that. Your wife's probably going to kill you when she sees this." The word wife hit harder than anything inside that shed. "I buried mine 4 days ago." His smile disappeared. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Nearby, a woman kept telling anyone who would listen that her doorbell camera had recorded everything. According to her, I hadn't gone into the shed once. I'd gone back twice, once for each boy, while half the street stood there filming. A college kid nearby said firefighters told him those extra minutes probably kept the boys from suffering anything worse than smoke inhalation. I didn't remember counting trips. I remembered smoke. I remembered coughing. I remembered 2 frightened kids who needed somebody to move. A paramedic cleaned the cut on my arm and wrapped it in gauze. Do you have family coming to get you? She asked. They're busy tonight. She looked at me for a second but didn't ask anything else. She handed me a bottle of water instead. I hope somebody gives you a ride home. So do I. A few minutes later, a reporter named Marisol Vega approached with a cameraman behind her. Mr. Pruitt, could we ask you a couple of questions? I'd rather not be on television. She told me the fire chief believed those boys wouldn't have made it out without me. They're alive, I said. That's enough. Marisol studied me for a moment, nodded, and told her cameraman to back off. Carol always liked people who understood that no meant no. Standing there in the rain, I remember thinking she probably would have liked Marisol Vega. With the street blocked by engines, hoses, and emergency vehicles, an officer offered to drive me the rest of the way home. I accepted and climbed into the back of his cruiser with the small canvas bag Carol had packed for Cape May resting on my lap. Her cardigan was still inside, something she'd worn maybe twice. I pulled it closer and caught the faint trace of her perfume. I held on to that smell for the entire ride. That was when I finally broke. Not because of the fire. Not because my arm was bleeding. Not even because I could have died. I cried because for the first time, I understood that no matter how late I got home, there would never again be a message from Carol asking, "Did you make it home safe?" Across town, my children still had no idea where I was. Gary had just sat down to dinner with Denise and their daughter when his phone started lighting up. First a neighbor called, then a guy from his softball league, then another relative. The softball guy barely gave him time to answer. Turn on Channel 9. Then he hung up. Gary switched on the television and froze. The same footage was already playing on a loop. A gray-haired man in a soaked flannel shirt emerging through smoke with a child in his arms, then turning around and disappearing back into the burning shed. Denise recognized me first. Her face went pale. "Gary, is that your dad?" He stared at the screen without answering. Across the city, Rachel got a call from her friend Priya. "I think your father's on the news." Rachel actually laughed at first, certain Priya had mistaken someone else for me. Then she looked at the television inside the hair salon and slowly sat back down. The anchor repeated my name, but it was the next sentence that stopped her cold. Walter Pruitt had reportedly returned to the city that evening after a memorial for Carol Pruitt, his wife of 39 years. Rachel stared at the screen. Suddenly, the text she had sent me only hours earlier looked different. "You really should have told us earlier so we could plan around it." She had been buried under deadlines, driving her kids to practice, and managing everything else in her own life. Not once that week had she stopped to imagine what it would feel like for me to scatter her mother's ashes and ride home alone. Sometimes people don't realize who they've failed until something forces them to look. While Gary and Rachel were calling me over and over, my phone sat face down on the kitchen counter. I never heard it vibrate. By morning, there were more than 40 missed calls and messages. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know where I was. I woke a little before 6. For a few quiet seconds, my mind gave me the mercy of forgetting. Then I reached across the bed, out of habit, and touched cold sheets. Carol was gone. The fire came back next, the smoke, the shattered window, the boys coughing in my arms. I got dressed without turning on the television. For 31 years, I had fixed problems quietly and walked away before anyone could make a fuss. I wasn't interested in becoming somebody's hero now. Around 8, someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, Marisol Vega was standing in the hallway, looking almost apologetic. "I know you said no interviews," she said. "I'm not here for that." Someone at the station had found my address through the police report, but Marisol had come for one reason. She had received an update from St. Agnes Hospital. Both boys were going to be fine. They had some smoke in their lungs, but nothing serious. Then she smiled. "The younger one keeps asking about the man who broke the window." I laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time since Carol died. His mother better tell him that doesn't mean he gets to start climbing through broken windows. Marisol laughed too. Then she warned me there were already a dozen reporters gathered near the end of my block. "Do me one favor," I said. "Keep this address to yourself. You have my word." Something about the way she said it made me believe her. What I didn't know was that reporters weren't the only people who had come looking for me. Gary and Rachel had arrived outside my house around 7 that morning. Gary still had the spare key I'd given him years ago for emergencies, and after spending the entire night trying to reach me, My children had finally decided this counted as one. Everything in the house was exactly where I had left it. Carol's reading chair still faced the window. My work boot sat beside the back door, but the kitchen was missing the smell that had filled it every morning for 39 years. Carol had always gotten up before me and started the coffee. Rachel stopped beside the table when she noticed a small dish holding several dried flowers from the memorial. "Mom's flowers," she whispered. Gary said nothing. For nearly a minute, neither of them moved. Finally, Rachel looked around the silent house. "We should straighten up before Dad gets back." She needed something to do with her hands. While dusting near the hallway closet, she moved one of Carol's winter coats and spotted an old metal toolbox pushed against the back wall. She pulled it out and opened it. There wasn't a single tool inside. Instead, she found photographs, letters, and a stack of small spiral notebooks, each dated in Carol's neat handwriting. Rachel picked one up. "I don't think we should read these." Gary hesitated. "Maybe Mom left them here because she wanted us to." Neither sounded convinced, but Rachel opened the first notebook. At first, there was nothing unusual: birthdays, a trip to the shore, complaints about a noisy neighbor. Then Gary saw his name. Carol had written about the year he bought his first house. The down payment had been more than he could manage, so I quietly sold my old boat and gave him the money. I made Carol promise never to tell him where it came from because I knew Gary would refuse it if he knew what I'd sacrificed. Gary read the entry twice. The color drained from his face. He told me he sold that boat because he never used it anymore. Rachel turned several pages and suddenly found her own name. During her divorce, the legal bills had started piling up. Carol had written that I took money directly from my retirement account to cover them. Afterward, when the family asked why we were moving into a smaller house, Carol and I simply said we wanted less space. Rachel covered her mouth. I thought downsizing was their idea. They kept reading. One entry explained why I started taking weekend shifts even after retirement. I had told everyone I was bored sitting at home. The truth was, Gary's business had nearly collapsed after one terrible winter, and I was quietly helping him stay afloat. Another entry explained why I kept putting off buying a new truck. Rachel's oldest needed braces, and the bills lasted almost 2 years. Then came the Grand Canyon trip Carol and I had planned for years but never took because tuition kept climbing and the grandchildren needed help. Page after page, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every time one of my children needed something, I gave up something of my own and made sure they never knew the price. Then Rachel reached an entry dated 5 months earlier. She started reading aloud. It was about Carol's final round of treatment. By then, our savings were almost gone. I emptied nearly everything we had left without hesitating and smiled while signing every form because I didn't want Carol worrying about money while she was fighting to stay alive. Rachel's voice began to crack as she reached the final lines. Carol had written that if she didn't survive, she hoped Gary and Rachel would never mistake my silence for indifference. I rarely told people what I sacrificed because I never wanted love to feel like a debt. To Carol, that silence had always hidden the biggest heart she had ever known. Gary slowly lowered himself onto the bottom stair. His elbows rested on his knees as his shoulders began to shake. I thought Dad was just cheap. Rachel wiped her face. So did I. For the first time, they looked differently at everything. They had ignored for years the truck I drove for more than a decade, the same winter coat I wore season after season, the vacations I never took, and the answer I gave whenever they asked if I needed anything. "I'm fine." They had always believed me, because believing was easier than asking another question. Around noon, the front door opened, and Denise walked in carrying sandwiches. She took one look at Gary sitting on the stairs, Rachel crying beside Carol's notebooks, and stopped. What happened? Neither of them knew where to begin. Denise read 2 pages from Carol's notebook, closed it, and sat beside Gary without saying a word. Gary stared at the floor. "I told him to take the train," he whispered. His wife was buried that afternoon, and I told him to take the train. Across the city, I was sitting alone on a bench, overlooking the river, watching the current slide beneath the bridge. Carol used to say water had a way of carrying everything somewhere eventually. My phone rang. Gary's name appeared on the screen. This time I answered. For several seconds, all I heard was his breathing. Then his voice broke. "Dad, please come home." 4 words I would have given almost anything to hear the night before. Now they arrived after an empty platform, a burning shed, and 40 missed calls. I didn't yell. I didn't ask what suddenly made me important. "I'm not ready yet, Gary." Then I ended the call. I wasn't trying to punish him. I simply didn't trust myself to walk into that house and pretend one apology could erase what I was still trying to understand. I spent the afternoon following the river. Joggers passed me. Two children tossed bread to ducks near the footbridge. Music drifted from an open apartment window. The city kept moving because, for everyone else, it was an ordinary day. Carol always said the world never waits until you're ready to move with it. That afternoon, I wasn't sure I knew how. Marisol called again that evening and immediately promised she wasn't chasing an interview. The fire department wanted to give me a commendation. The mayor's office wanted to recognize me too, and the boy's family desperately wanted to thank me. "I'm not interested in awards," I told her. "I figured you'd say that." Then her voice changed. "But there is something else." Every station in town was already running the story. They were calling me a hero and inventing explanations for why I had been walking alone that night. Marisol wanted to tell it accurately. "They don't need to know," I said. "Maybe they do," she replied. "A lot more people understand loneliness than they understand heroism." I didn't answer. Then Marisol told me why the story mattered to her. Her mother had died alone in a care facility during the worst months of the pandemic. She never got the goodbye she thought she would have. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, I agreed to one interview under 3 conditions. No politics, no dramatic music trying to make me into something I wasn't, and if she asked something I didn't want to answer, we moved on. "Deal," she said. We filmed the next morning inside a quiet room at the fire station. No crowd, no studio lights. Just 2 folding chairs and 1 camera. Marisol started with the question everyone wanted answered. "Why did you go back for the second boy?" I looked down at the bandage on my arm. After loving someone for 39 years and then losing her, fear doesn't carry the same weight anymore. I heard a child inside. That was enough. Marisol waited a moment before asking the question I knew was coming. "Did your family know you were coming home that night?" I could have told her everything. I could have repeated Gary's message telling me to take the train and Rachel's complaint that I should have planned better. Millions of strangers could have judged my children before the interview was over. Instead, I said, "They've got a lot on their plates. They're raising families, building careers, trying to keep everything together. They couldn't make it." Marisol watched me carefully. "You don't sound angry with them." I thought about the empty station, Carol's ashes, and Gary crying on the phone. Then I looked at her and said, "I've had enough sadness this week. I don't need to turn any of it into anger." I didn't feel like stacking anger on top of it. But the sentence that traveled everywhere was even simpler. They've got a lot on their plates. Not the fire, not the shattered window, not even the footage of me carrying those boys through the smoke. That sentence was what people remembered. Nearly 80,000 people saw the clip, and thousands seemed to recognize their own families in it. One woman wrote that her mother used the exact same words every time she forgot to call. Another said she watched the interview that night and booked a flight home for the following weekend. Sometimes we make excuses for the people who disappoint us because saying how much they hurt us feels worse than protecting them. Gary watched the interview alone in his car. When it ended, he shut off his phone and stayed there with his forehead against the steering wheel. Rachel watched from her kitchen. Her youngest daughter climbed onto the stool beside her and asked, "Why is Grandpa saying nice things about people who hurt his feelings?" Rachel opened her mouth, but no answer came. That evening, something unexpected started happening at my house. Neighbors I barely knew left casseroles and handwritten cards on the porch. Someone trimmed my hedges without knocking. Someone else raked the yard and disappeared before I could thank them. Nobody posted about it. Nobody waited for applause. They simply started doing for me what, according to them, I had quietly been doing around that neighborhood for nearly 20 years. When I finally walked home that evening, 2 folding chairs were waiting on my porch. Gary sat in one. Rachel sat in the other. Neither was looking at a phone. For several seconds, the 3 of us just stared at one another. Gary stood first. "Can I carry your bag?" I handed it to him, and suddenly remembered the last time he'd carried one of my bags. He had been about 11 years old. Rachel gave me a nervous smile. "I made coffee. I tried Mom's way." "How bad is it?" "Pretty bad," I laughed. She did too. It was the first real laugh we had shared since Carol's service. Inside, my counters were covered with food, flowers, and cards from people whose names I could barely remember. Gary set my bag down and finally said what both of them had been avoiding. "We found Mom's notebooks." I nodded. "Figured you would eventually." "Did you want us to?" he asked. "They belonged to your mother. They weren't mine to hide from you." We sat around the same kitchen table where Carol had hosted 39 Thanksgivings. No television, no phones. Just 3 cups of coffee slowly going cold while 3 people finally stopped avoiding the things that mattered. Gary went first. "Why didn't you ever tell me about the boat?" "Because helping you wasn't supposed to become another debt you carried." Rachel looked down at her cup. "And the house?" "Why did you let me think downsizing was your idea?" "Because your mother wanted you to get through that divorce with your dignity intact. That was enough for us." Gary swallowed hard before asking the question that had been bothering him since the interview. "Why didn't you tell Marisol the truth?" I looked at him. "About what?" "About us. About what we said that night. You could have told everybody I left you at that station after Mom's memorial. You could have told them exactly what kind of son I was." Rachel's eyes filled. "And what kind of daughter I was." I let the silence sit for a moment. "And then what?" Neither answered. "Millions of strangers hate you for a week? You lose sleep, people attack your families, and somehow I'm supposed to feel better?" Gary looked down. I shook my head. "Public shame doesn't heal a private wound. Your mother understood that better than anyone. She never believed in tearing down somebody you love just so they can hurt as much as you do." "Your mother always believed accountability should lead somewhere," I told them. "Otherwise, all you've done is leave somebody broken." Rachel looked at me carefully. "Were you angry with us?" "Of course I was. You didn't look angry on television." I almost smiled. 39 years of marriage taught me not to speak while I'm furious. Otherwise, I wake up the next morning with 2 problems instead of one. A few days later, Gary, Rachel, and I drove to Cape May. We walked out onto the same pier where I had scattered Carol's ashes and stood facing the water without saying much. Gary finally stepped forward. "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have been there for Dad." Rachel wiped her eyes. "I forgot how much he's been taking care of us our whole lives." I looked at both of them. Most of raising children is teaching them how to walk away on their own. The hard part is making sure they know how to walk back. That was when Gary broke. He wrapped his arms around me, and this wasn't the quick, stiff hug grown sons give their fathers because they think they're supposed to. He held on like the little boy I remembered, as if he had finally understood how close he'd come to losing the father he had assumed would always be there. Things didn't magically become perfect after Cape May, but they changed. Gary started showing up every Tuesday morning carrying 2 coffees. No appointment, no excuse. He just came. Rachel began stopping by Sunday evenings with homemade soup. It never tasted quite like Carol's, and one night she finally admitted it. "I'm missing something." I took another spoonful. "Patience." She laughed. "That's an ingredient?" To your mother it was. One Saturday, my granddaughter Emma wandered into the garage and asked if I could teach her to build something. We found some scrap wood and spent the afternoon making a birdhouse that leaned noticeably to one side. Emma stared at it when we finished. "Grandpa, it's crooked." "Most families are," I told her. "If the foundation is strong, they still stand." About a month later, the fire department invited me to speak at a community safety event downtown. My first instinct was to refuse. Then I remembered something Carol used to tell me. If something painful you survived can help another person, maybe some good ought to come from it. So I went. Near the end, someone in the crowd raised a hand. "Mr. Pruitt, why did you run toward that shed when everyone else was running away?" I thought about Carol's 18 months of treatments, hospital rooms, sleepless nights, and all the times I had wished somebody else could carry what she was carrying. When someone you love is fighting for their life, you learn pretty quickly that waiting for somebody else to step forward can cost you something you'll never get back. Then I told them the lesson the fire had forced my own family to learn. Families usually don't fall apart because of one enormous betrayal. More often, it happens through small delays: a call you'll return tomorrow, a dinner you cancel, a visit you keep rescheduling, a message you read and forget to answer. Eventually, you start believing there will always be another chance. Sometimes there isn't. So if somebody came to mind while you were hearing my story, don't wait until next week. Call them today. Ask how they're doing. And stay on the phone long enough to hear the real answer. And I want to ask you something. Do you think I was right to protect Gary and Rachel during that interview? Or should I have told the whole truth? Comment 1 if you think protecting them was the right choice. 2 if you think they needed to face the truth publicly. And 3 if you're still torn, because some nights I am too. Tell me where you're watching from and who this story made you think about. It still amazes me that people separated by thousands of miles can recognize the same kind of silence inside their own families. And if Walter Pruitt's story meant something to you, subscribe and stay with us. There are more stories here about ordinary people, family, forgiveness, and the sacrifices we often notice only when it's almost too late. Until next time, take care of the people who keep showing up for you, and don't wait for something terrible to happen before you finally notice who they are.